August 23rd, 1305. Dawn breaks over London, revealing a bloodthirsty gathering at Smithfield. In the square's center, tools of torment await their target. Ropes, sharp knives, and a fire ablaze ominously. The crowd's screams echo through the streets as guards drag a tall, bearded man upon a wooden hurdle. His name is William Wallace, and in just minutes, he will meet the most cruel death saved for traitors. He will be hanged almost to death, disemboweled, while still alive, castrated, beheaded, and cut into 4 parts. How did a simple Scottish knight become the greatest enemy of the English crown? To understand Wallace's awful end, we must go back to the misty mountains of Scotland, where a young nobleman grew up hearing stories about his people's freedom. William Wallace was born around 1270 in Elderslie, Renfrewshire, son of Malcolm Wallace, a minor landowner who served the Scottish kings loyally. The Scotland of that era was an independent and prosperous kingdom ruled by Alexander III, a respected monarch who maintained good relations with England. But fate would drastically change in 1286, when Alexander died without leaving direct heirs. His only successor was Margaret, a 3-year-old child known as the Maid of Norway. During the trip to claim the Scottish throne, the young princess died tragically, leaving the succession in question. 2 Scottish nobles claimed the throne, John Balliol and Robert Bruce. Unable to resolve the issue, the Scottish lords made a fatal blunder. They asked King Edward I of England to arbitrate the dispute. Edward I, known as Longshanks because of his impressive height, was one of the most ambitious and ruthless monarchs in Europe. He saw in the Scottish succession crisis a unique chance to extend his power. He chose John Balliol as king, but only after forcing him to recognize English rule over Scotland. Wallace's kingdom had become a vassal state, and the national shame was just beginning. Balliol, mockingly nicknamed Tomb Tabard, the empty coat, tried to resist Edward's increasing demands, but was quickly removed in 1296. Edward marched on Scotland with a devastating army, sacked cities, massacred civilians, and took the Stone of Scone, the sacred symbol of Scottish monarchy, as a trophy to Westminster. Scotland had ceased to exist as an independent nation. It was in this context of brutal occupation that William Wallace emerged from obscurity. In May 1297, an apparently minor argument would change the course of history. Wallace was in Lanark when an English official, William Heselrigg, sheriff of the town, tried to arrest him for defying English authority. During the chaos, Heselrigg was killed. Some accounts suggest it was Wallace himself who killed him in single combat. Heselrigg's death sparked a flame that would spread throughout Scotland. Wallace neither fled nor hid. Instead, he gathered his followers and attacked the English garrison of Lanark, killing all the occupying soldiers. The rebellion had Start D, and Wallace quickly became the leader of a movement that grew stronger each day. What set Wallace apart from other rebels was his revolutionary vision of resistance. While most Scottish nobles fought for their own land interests, Wallace fought for the radical concept of a free and independent Scotland. His message resonated especially with ordinary people, peasants, craftsmen, and small landowners who suffered directly under English occupation. During the summer of 1297, Wallace traveled throughout Scotland, gathering support. His force grew from a few hundred men to thousands. He attacked isolated English garrisons, liberated occupied castles, and most importantly, offered hope to a people who had lost all national dignity. Edward I initially underestimated the threat. He ordered John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, to crush the rebellion with a force of about 20 men, trained soldiers, heavy knights, and Welsh archers. For Surrey, it would be a simple punitive operation against poorly armed Scottish bandits. September 11th, 1297. The two forces met at Stirling Bridge, a narrow bridge over the River Forth that controlled the main route between the Scottish Highlands and Lowlands. Surrey, confident in his numerical superiority, decided to cross the bridge and attack immediately. It was a choice that would alter military history. Wallace had chosen his position with tactical brilliance. He allowed part of the English army to cross the narrow bridge, splitting their forces. At the crucial moment when about half the English had crossed, Wallace ordered the attack. The Scots emerged from the hills like an avalanche, cutting off the English rear guard and preventing more troops from crossing. The battle turned into a massacre. The English knights trapped on the north bank of the river, with no room to maneuver, were systematically destroyed. Hugh Cressingham, the English treasurer of Scotland, and one of the most hated men by the populace, was killed and supposedly flayed. They say Wallace had a sword belt made from his skin. Surrey fled in panic, abandoning thousands of soldiers to their deaths. Stirling Bridge was more than a military triumph. It was a national miracle. A numerically smaller Scottish army had utterly defeated the English war machine. The news spread rapidly across Europe. Wallace was hailed as guardian of Scotland and began being treated as an equal by foreign kings. But Edward I was not a man who accepted defeat. The humiliation of Stirling Bridge awakened his most terrible fury. He vowed he would return to Scotland with a force that would make any future resistance impossible. During 1298, he assembled the largest army he had ever commanded. 30 men, including the best of English cavalry and thousands of Welsh archers. July 20, 1298. The two armies met at Falkirk, an open plain that favored English cavalry. Wallace had learned from Stirling Bridge that he couldn't repeat the same tactics. He organized his troops in schiltrons, circular formations of spearmen, with spears pointing outward, like giant hedgehogs. Between the schiltrons, he placed his few archers. The battle started with a massive charge of English cavalry, but the schiltrons held firm. Scottish spears impaled horses and riders. For a spell, it seemed Wallace might replicate his prior success. Then Edward revealed his critical advantage: the Welsh archers. Thousands of arrows began to pour down upon the schiltrons. The Scots, lacking heavy armor, were wiped out where they stood. The circular formations, so effective against cavalry charges, turned into death traps under the onslaught of projectiles. Wallace ordered a retreat, but it was already too late. Thousands of Scots perished at Falkirk, including many of the Resistance's finest fighters. After Falkirk, Wallace vanished into the mountains. Many Scottish nobles, accepting defeat as inevitable, made peace with Edward I. But Wallace refused to concede to English dominion. For 7 years, he waged guerrilla warfare, ambushing English patrols, freeing prisoners, and keeping the spirit of resistance alive. Edward I, however, understood that as long as Wallace remained free, Scotland could never truly be conquered. He offered vast rewards for his capture and dispatched agents across Europe to find him. The hunt for the Scottish hero became the English king's personal fixation. In 1000, 305. Wallace's luck ran out. Betrayed by Sir John Menteith, a Scottish noble secretly allied with the English, he was captured near Glasgow. Menteith delivered Wallace to English authorities in exchange for lands and titles. A betrayal that would forever tarnish his name. Wallace's capture was met with jubilation in London. Edward I finally had in his grasp the man who had dared defy him, who had humiliated his armies, and inspired a nation to dream of freedom. But Wallace's execution would be more than just a death. It would be a public display designed to intimidate anyone who challenged English power. On August 23, 1305, Wallace was brought to trial at Westminster Hall, accused of treason, sacrilege, and murder. He rejected the charges with dignity, arguing that he could not be guilty of treason against a king he had never recognized as legitimate. "I have never sworn allegiance to King Edward," he declared. "Therefore, I cannot be a traitor." His courageous words only fueled the judge's fury. He was condemned to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, the most brutal punishment reserved for traitors. The execution would be public, a spectacle designed to deter any future Scottish resistance. On the execution morning, a crowd of thousands filled Smithfield. Wallace was tied to a wooden hurdle and dragged through London's streets to the execution site, his body bloodied by the road. Arriving at the scaffold, he was partially hanged, suspended until nearly unconscious, but removed before dying. Still alive and conscious, Wallace was laid on a table and his abdomen opened with a sharp knife. His entrails were removed and burned before his eyes. Then he was castrated, still breathing and witnessing his own mutilation. Only then was his head severed, finally ending his suffering. Wallace's body was quartered, his parts sent to different cities in Scotland and England as a warning. His head was impaled on a spike and displayed on London Bridge, where it remained for years as a symbol of English authority. His arms were sent to Newcastle and Berwick, his legs to Perth and Stirling. However, Edward I made a critical error. By executing Wallace so brutally and publicly, he transformed him into a martyr. The Scottish hero's terrible death did not frighten his people. It enraged them. Wallace's memory became an enduring symbol of Scottish resistance, inspiring future generations of patriots. Less than a year after Wallace's execution, Robert Bruce, a claimant to the throne, murdered his rival John Comyn in a church and crowned himself King of Scotland. The War of Independence resumed with renewed vigor, fueled by the memory of the martyred hero. Edward I died in 1307 during a campaign to crush the new rebellion, taking his obsession with conquering Scotland to the grave. William Wallace's legacy surpassed his gruesome death. He had shown that a resolute people could challenge the most powerful empire of their era. His refusal to surrender, even when facing torture and death, inspired not only the Scots, but liberation movements throughout the centuries. Today, more than 700 years later, William Wallace remains a global symbol of the fight for freedom. His story teaches that some ideals are more important than life itself, and that true defeat only comes when a people stop dreaming of liberty. The hero who was disemboweled in public achieved an immortality that no tyrant king ever achieved.